Welcome to Feeling Seen, the podcast about the movies that make us feel seen. And today's co-host, actor Devery Jacobs, is feeling seen by a whole collection of characters, as we'll learn in a moment. You'll recognize Devery from the wonderful FX show Reservation Dogs, but what you might not know is she also worked behind the scenes on that show as a director and a writer. She's been in the Marvel series What If and Echo. Her latest is the feature Backspot from executive producer Elliot Page, and it's a cheerleading sports drama that not only she stars in, but she also produced from the ground up with director D.W. Watterson. Devery Jacobs, welcome to Feeling Seen. What else do the people need to know about you before we get started today?
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me. And I don't know if people need to know this information, but random fact, I hate ketchup.
Now, is it like a Heinz and like only thing, or do you like a fancy ketchup? Because people offer a fancy ketchup like it's Heinz, but it's not.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a homemade ketchup, like a homemade spicy ketchup that I'm into, but yeah, aside from that, it's like the tomato and sweet just doesn't go well together for me.
I think that's very fair. I am opposition. I like a ketchup, but where that speaks to me is a marinara or like a pizza sauce that goes on the sweeter side when I like a vinegary tart, because I don't think a tomato-based sauce should be like a sweet thing. So,
agreed.
I wanted to actually start by saying, I wanted to tell you the part of Backspot that made me feel most seen, which is the scene when I was watching with my wife and you guys learned that your elite cheer coach, Evan Rachel Wood, has an ex-wife. She's a gay. She's a queer. And you guys, you run out of that gym and you're like, she's even better. She's the best. Can you believe? Had this same moment recently when me and my wife were going to see a potential apartment and we realized that we were like the finalist. And when the landlord showed up to like interview us to meet us and interview us to see if we were the one, she was like, and this is my wife. And me and my wife and her best friend, we looked at each other and the way we screamed inside to one another, because we like, this is our moment. Like the stars have aligned because our people have come together in this moment. So thank you for that.
Oh, yeah. I like anytime a celebrity comes out, it's like a huge celebration where I'm like, oh, my God, we're in the same community. We're in the club. Like, it's, yeah, who doesn't geek out when they realize their stan is gay?
It was a perfect time to see this because she was explaining this to her parents in like the group chat she's in with them. She was like, and then you wouldn't believe it. They showed up and they're lesbians, like they're wives. And her stepdad was like, I don't know why that matters. And then her mom like responds later, was like, I had the same question. Why does that matter? And we were like, just like every friend we have that we told, it was an immediate like high five, OMG, like that's the best kismet moment. And then her parents were like, gosh, I don't know why that's it. And it's like, well, I don't know. It's just nice when you meet somebody who speaks the same language as you, I guess.
Totally. Yes.
So to the business at hand, I guess let's start with Backspot. I've mentioned a scene from it. I've mentioned the director of it. Tell us a bit about Backspot.
Yeah, I have been working on Backspot as a producer for almost 7 years. Mm-hmm. And I worked closely with D.W. Watterson, who created the story by, and they're also like, we've worked together really closely on this for a number of years with our writer, Joanne Sarrazin, who did just such an incredible job. It's executive produced by Elliot Page. And I also play the leading character of Riley, who moves up from her mid-level cheer squad to the Thunderhawks, whom she's been pining after with coach Eileen McNamara, played by Evan Rachel Wood. And when she lands on this team, she feels enormous pressure. Riley's somebody who like deals with anxiety and has to figure out a healthier relationship with the sport she loves with her girlfriend on the squad, Amanda, played by Kudakwashe Rutendo, and also ultimately with her coach. And yeah, it's a kick-ass cheerleading movie that's also very, very queer.
Yeah, it is. And just that way that I read a lot about like queer presence in horror and the evolution of that, and sort of from the like more allowably overt in the pre-code era to when it was then kind of legislated out of existence under the production code, and so it had to become all very secretive. And then the code goes down, it becomes more overt again, and just like the cycles of its presence in genre cinema. And then considering the 2010s recently, it feels like what a filmmaker friend and I call like ambient queerness, where there is like, I feel like Bodies really drove this home for me. This thing where just like people just show up and it's just true. And if it's a part of the plot, it's because of messy queers and that just being queer culture, but not as a matter of fact of like, now we have to go through like, there doesn't have to be now tell me in the script why they've got to be gay. Like people just happen to be, because in this world, as Quinta Brunson says, people be gay.
People be gay.
People be gay. You brought such a delightful selection of characters that you had expressed a feeling of being seen in for our little conversation premise here that we have. And I'm just going to go through this little collection. We have Kiki of Kiki's Delivery Service. We have Harriet the Spy. We have Lady Bird. And then we have Cheryl Dunye in her movie The Watermelon Woman. And what I found between kind of all of these characters was a sort of embarking on or seeking out an adventure of discovery. And one that begins as one that is an external, but then, of course, as it is cinema and as is life, like it becomes a kind of inward journey. Like The Watermelon Woman is Cheryl Dunye setting out to make this movie about this figure she sees in like classic kind of, race films, I guess classic era, but race films, not necessarily classic race films. This character, the Watermelon Woman, that she sets out to make a documentary about. Then you have Kiki, who is setting out, she's a 13-year-old witch in training, and she has to go out on the year on her own for the customary period in her development. And then Harriet the Spy, a girl sort of unlike anybody else in her town, who is a tiny little Veronica Mars. And then Lady Bird, who, as we know, is seeking something bigger, seeking something interesting. And so I wanted to hear from you about that sense of, when did you set out on your adventure? And when did you kind of realize you were setting out on your adventure?
I mean, I always felt really called to film and television, and I desperately tried to pursue something else. I used to work at the Native Women's Shelter of Montreal. I was going towards the path of social work. Like that was the path that I was choosing for myself, because I was like, I hadn't at the time like clued into my queerness, but I was like a queer Mohawk Anglophone kid in the middle of Quebec in Canada, which is like a French-speaking province. And so it was the odds of me being able to pursue this life path was like odds to none.
Yeah.
Ended up being cast in a film back in the day called Rhymes for Young Ghouls, which was my first leading role ever. It was also the first time I had worked with an Indigenous writer-director, and was really kind of like the first time that I had decided for myself that the character was queer and was able to like really step into her shoes and find some of myself in that character.
The time-honored tradition of queers of finding ourselves in places we are not. You cemented your home in the community at that moment.
I mean, it was like the first seedlings of it, I'll say. But from that point, I like moved by myself to New York. I was like really young to be doing that, and it was really intimidating. But just being out there, I knew that I wanted to like pursue this thing that I now realized I couldn't not do, like acting and pursuing film and TV. Like as soon as I got that taste of it, of what it meant, and had proven to myself that I really could do this, working in Rhymes for Young Ghouls, I was like, okay, I can't not. Like you can't close Pandora's box from that point. And so I moved to New York, and like it was a disaster. I like lived in a bedroom that had no windows. In another place I lived, it was like infested with roaches.
Oh, yeah.
I was so broke. I ended up having to come back. But also from that experience, I started writing and directing my own shorts. And like, I feel like that time of my life was where I first started really choosing myself and started really getting those like inklings of who I actually was in being a queer person.
And in addition to Rhymes for Young Ghouls, a film by Jeff Barnaby, you were also in Blood Quantum, I believe, correct?
That's right.
That was, I got to interview Jeff when that came out, and that's one of my favorite interviews that I ever got to do. That man did not put a cork on his point of view and his experience in the world. And that was one of the best interviews I ever did. And so I was very excited to be reminded. And I was like, oh my God, yes, I remember you from that. I wanted to hear about like what you said, like working for a Native like writer and director and just like probably not having to explain why you were Native in a script. Not having to be like, well, no, this is why I am here and Native at the same time. Check writing white producers. And I wanted to hear about like, you speak so eloquently about what your opportunities enable for other people in addition to enabling for yourself. And I've read you talk about wanting to be a worthy elder in your life and in your career. And I wanted to hear like from like the starting point, what did the power of opportunity grant you? And working with an example kind of like figure in production with Rhymes for Young Ghouls and Jeff Barnaby.
I mean, Jeff had really fought for me to get that role. I think the financiers didn't see me in the character, and they had like, I don't know, a really rough version of who they imagined this character to be. And here I was like a teenager straight off my res. And yeah, I really had to fight for it, and Jeff fought for me with that. And I feel like there was just such an innate sense of understanding between us of that shorthand. We're also both, he's Mi'kmaq and I'm Mohawk, but we're both like Northeastern nations from those communities. And there's such a sense of rebellion and radicalization and resistance inherently built into Northeastern nations because we've had contact for so long with Europeans, and we've had to fight so hard to preserve our language and cultures and communities. And so like Jeff had a really kick-ass like metal sensibility to him while also being bluesy and like all of the things that his voice was. He has since passed of cancer. Rest in peace to my dear friend Jeff. But like, I wouldn't have been acting today had it not been for him and being cast in Rhymes and fighting for me to get this role. Like, he launched my career and launched the belief in me, in myself that I had in myself to pursue this as a profession.
If you're good at one thing, apply it to everything. You can turn anything into an art form. I've been doing this for years.
So when did you start getting exposed to these characters like Harriet the Spy? Like I remember when that came out when I was young, and I'm in my late 30s. I'm an elder millennial. And then Kiki's Delivery Service, I think that's been out since the late 90s. So these are ones that have been around for a while. Did you start watching these when you were little, or did you come to them later?
Oh, no, I watched them when I was a kid. I watched them religiously. Kiki's Delivery Service was like, we had this knockoff Blockbuster on my res, and I never owned it, but I would rent it all the time. And then Harriet the Spy, I had watched the Nickelodeon movie originally.
Yes.
From then on, then I read the book and fell in love with it even more. And like, I think Harriet the Spy is something I've come back to as an adult. I was gifted like a first edition copy of it because I loved the book and movie so much. And when I was having like a really hard time, I read the book and I devoured it. And then I was looking up the author Louise Fitzhugh, and then I learned that she was an out lesbian in the 60s, and everything just came together for me. Being somebody who came out as an adult, there's like sometimes feelings of like inferiority complex for not being queer enough, for not realizing from the time I hit puberty or whatever that was so much a part of who I was. And I think I was like denying myself for like who I was for a very long time. But to then see that like Harriet was actually a baby gay all along. And then also with like Rosie O'Donnell playing Golly in like it all comes together. The queerness, the lesbianism is there, and I like felt so fucking seen.
They tried to squash me like a bug. It's too hard. It's not worth it.
Oh, never say that, Harriet. You're worth it. You're an individual, and you know something? That makes people nervous. And it's going to keep making people nervous your whole life.
My whole life?
Yep.
What do I do?
You stay true to Harriet, and you accept the cost. Now, come on. That's enough lessons for today. Okay? You're 11. I think it's time for you to start writing something other than notes.
Like what?
You'll think of something.
Yeah, that, like, it's crazy, the commonality to the queer experience of being like, oh yeah, like all of my like friends who I went to the dance with together, like, yeah, we were all queer people. Like how like even when it was unnamed, these people were finding each other. Like there's a reason like we were doing theater, like there's a reason we were doing choir kind of thing. And it's funny to like how reliable it is when you talk to people about back at their high school. Oh yeah, like the boy that I took to prom, like obviously he was gay and so was I, and we were like protecting each other by going to the dance.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Classic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in your sort of like intersectional experience, has that creation of your own roadmap and like, you know, like you said, like you didn't realize I was queer yet, but like coming to that later, I feel like we get attuned sooner in our lives to that process of like self-manufacture and self-identification, because it's like, listen, I don't have the like the handy guideposts that you guys do. So I wanted to hear about your path of like having to like self-forge in lieu of example.
I mean, yeah, I feel like that's literally everything I feel like I have to do. I feel like I have to learn everything the hard way right now, which is tough when you don't necessarily have mentors who have been through the same things you have, or like that there is no roadmap to going about it as a queer Native person. I feel like it's being done in isolation by so many of us in this industry. And then when we come together, really clinging on to that sense of community as a life raft until we can like meet again. But yeah, I mean, I think that's also a reason why Cheryl Dunye's Watermelon Woman resonated so deeply for me, was because like at the end, it really feels like such a documentary where you're learning and uncovering about this woman who was a historic figure, who was actually queer. And it's like you're uncovering all the pieces of the puzzle.
The Watermelon Woman, Faye Richards, was lovers with Martha Page, this white woman director.
Wait a minute. The actress was lovers with this famous director?
Yes.
Well, first of all, I'm stunned to hear that that the director was lesbian or bisexual. That this is news to me in the first place, right? But the idea of any kind of an interracial relationship at this time it's mind-boggling, because we can see as decades after World War II and look who's guess who's coming to dinner. You can see how charged the question of any sort of interracial relationship was. So it seems to me an astounding discovery that you have made.
Oh, well, I guess I'll just keep on pursuing it.
Oh, good luck to you.
Oh, thank you, Professor Paya. Thank you very much.
And then, spoiler alert, I mean, it's been out since the 90s. At this point, I feel like it's fair game.
Yeah, no, unveil. I'm sorry, everybody. We're dropping a bomb on you now.
Yes. But, like, at the end, she reveals, like, I'm going to paraphrase here, but it's something like, the Watermelon Woman is a work of fiction, and sometimes you need to create the history you need to see. Yeah. Something like that.
Yeah, I think it was as you were getting on, that was the quote that I was writing down actually, was sometimes you have to create your own history. Yeah.
And like the fashion of that movie, the conversations about white queers, the experiences that she's having, the yearning for history and seeing herself in that space, like those are things that I think resonate not only with like Black queer folks and Black lesbians, but also like Indigenous queer people, like people of every different cultures. Like there's been such a loss of history and such a loss of acknowledgement in our communities because of Western society and culture. And I think that like that yearning to see it and wanting to create it yourself is something that I take personally.
I'm so glad you brought that up specifically, because that touched on actually, like, I rarely write down like as many like quotes from people as I've like written down from you. Like from like, you don't want to throw people's like even slightly past selves at them and be like, answer to this. But you like had such a beautiful quote that like you are such a great interview to read. And you were talking about the characters on Reservation Dogs, like more specifically in this one interview, and you said they're real because we're making them real, and they're real for the people who are receiving them. And then you get into like how the character of Elora is real because you've brought her to life. Elora Danan, your character on Reservation Dogs.
So, says here you dropped out of high school. Why'd you do that?
I guess I was just in a different place.
Now you know college is harder than high school. you really gonna have to study.
I understand.
Okay. So what do we want to major in?
Maybe mental health. Like maybe work as a mental health advocate or something. I don't know.
Okay. Well, what about a scientist or a tribal leader?
No.
And that, as I was like, because I watched Watermelon Woman again recently for like review of something else. And so I was like, oh, well, what perfect timing on this. And then when I read you saying that, it made me think immediately of that ending card of Watermelon Woman, where like this character, this idea has been brought to life so thoroughly within the movie Watermelon Woman because it's done in such like a avant documentary kind of style, but then it's like dropped on you that like, hey, I made this whole thing up. And the bottom line is like, because I'm first, like I am the first Black lesbian to make a feature film and direct it and star in it. And now it is for you to see. When you're in that position, there is so much history behind you that you suddenly become emblematic of, but because you haven't seen it, we have to create our own to begin the process of making our stories existent and valid. And I thought that you talking about how like these characters are, you know, they're on a page, sure, but like they're also real people because we've made them so. You discuss the like as animate beings, story as animate being in your cultural experience and tradition, and the idea of thinking of these fictions as animate beings, I think really so well encapsulates the power of what a representative fiction can do for somebody in terms of being a touch point, because they take on a life of their own outside of what the creator even imbued them with to be what the person who consumed them needs.
Absolutely. I don't know that that was something that I learned necessarily from my culture specifically, but I did learn it from a really good two-spirit indigiqueer friend of mine, Joshua Whitehead, who is the author of the beautiful novel Johnny Appleseed. And in his cultures, because he's OG Cree, like Ojibwe and Cree, it was there that they described stories as animate beings, and it really clicked into place for me, especially like, I don't know, being an actor where the goal is always not to play the character, but for the character to play you in a way where you're just kind of like invoking it in a way. And I think that ends up like enriching the story, but also like it's true that like these characters end up becoming real for the people receiving them. And I definitely think that The Watermelon Woman was that for me watching it. Like and yeah, I think what Cheryl was able to do and imagine and bring to life and breathe life into is like, it's a testament because it has gone on to live so many lives. It's now like, I think it's in the Criterion Collection, right? Yes. So like, and I only saw that film last year. There was like a queer cinema club in Toronto where I'm based. And I was like, I've never seen this movie. I've had so many people recommend it to me. Let me watch it on the big screen. And like, I was so glad that I did, because I feel like my 2024 brain is so like hardwired for quick videos and TikTok and just like mind numbing stuff that I don't know if I was at home if I would have had the same kind of patience and attention had I not been in like a dark room with a big screen. But I was so glad to watch it, and I thought it was so beautiful, and like it blew me away. Like I think I need a rewatch actually.
I wrote to the studio and got these glamorous photos of Faye taken in 1938. It looks like she was trying to bust out of the mammy roles, but of course in 1938 that couldn't really work.
Oh, don't cry, Missy. Master Charles is coming back for sure. I know he is. Do you really think so, Elsie?
1939's a big year for Faye. I don't know what happened between her and Martha, but she definitely moved back to Philly. She really worked hard at becoming the film star she wanted to be. Faye no longer calls herself the Watermelon Woman. In all of her films at Liberty Studios, she goes by the name Faye Richards.
In my rewatch of it recently, what really took me back was like how sometimes you watch movies that are pioneering films, and they help bring a movement along with them, and they become representative of that. And Watermelon Woman is one of those movies where you watch and you're like, damn, but not like it's not like 30 movies came after this movie like this one. You watch it and it's still, even almost 3 decades later, maybe 3 decades fully, it still feels singular. It still feels like, damn, this is not beholden to the mores of then or the mores of now. And I think it's that, like, I feel like that kind of encapsulates. It's at once like saddening to know that it didn't like usher in a whole like wave of like, look at all these Watermelon Woman imitators. Like, in a way, yes, but not with the authenticity and sort of like granular truth of that movie. Just entertainment and joy. And so yeah, it's cool and also a bummer to watch something still feel so fresh 30 years later, because you're like, oh, this should have meant a lot more of these and it didn't.
It's so relevant. It's still so relevant. And yes, there should have, like, Cheryl Denny should have had such a career after that. Mm-hmm. And it's wild that she hasn't. And, you know, that's, yeah. I mean, I see that also with like Alice Wu, who did Saving Face, and then I think 20 years later that she did the other half. I'm just like, come on, fund these lesbians of color. Come on.
And I mean, we appreciate you being out here on the front lines fighting, working, producing a movie for all the years that it can take to bring it to life, and being like, I am not going to quit on this.
Oh man, there's times where it nearly broke us, but like, it's the movie that I needed to see growing up. I feel like I would have come out a lot sooner. I would have seen myself on screen a lot sooner.
You're an accomplished gymnast as well. Like, this obviously movie is cheerleading, but you are an accomplished gymnast in your past as well.
Yeah, definitely. I was able to like bust out all the old gymnast moves, not without great effort.
Not, as Evan Rachel Wood says, making it look easy, perhaps.
Oh, hell no. But yeah, I ended up doing all of my own stunts except for one in Backspot.
Damn, nice work. I love a sports drama. Cheerleading is actually one of the things that scares me the most, because it's either going to be like a stick it or a bring it on cheerleading experience where you're like, okay, people are going to live. But then like you watch a harrowing cheer experience, and I'm waiting for someone to die the entire time. I'm waiting for a broken neck the entire time. So like a cheerleading drama, I'm actually going to be inherently on edge, because I'm like, it is such easy conflict and terror to bring into this that someone's body is going to fall in half the wrong way, and that's going to be it. So your movie had me feeling very unsafe.
Yeah, I mean, it is such a dangerous sport. People really dismiss cheerleading as like sideline cheer or like dancers and whatnot. And like, they deserve respect too. But like with like all-star cheerleading, specifically competitive cheer, it is one of the most dangerous sports that leads in concussions for all female athletes. Jesus. It's like, it's no joke. And we need to put respect on cheerleaders' names. And I think cheer was really helpful in getting funders on board with us, because we're trying to like pitch this gritty, badass cheerleading movie. D.W. Watterson, the director who is queer and non-binary, was saying like, I want to shoot this the way a male director might shoot a football movie. And people weren't getting it. Like, they didn't understand. And then when cheer came out, we were able to point to that and be like, this is the sport we're talking about. This is what we need. And then people started to clue in, and like things started to fall into place for us. But yeah, cheerleading is like so badass. I personally think it's harder than gymnastics as a former gymnast.
At least, like, I feel like I was actually having this exact conversation last night where, like, I was like, at least in gymnastics, like, you're doing things that are terrifying, but you are, as the individual, like, in control of the actions. You're not being thrown in gymnastics.
No.
And you're not catching other people who are being thrown in gymnastics. So that feels like if I'm playing catch and I throw a ball, like, I've made a decision and a ball is coming back at me. If there's just like several people throwing things at me from various directions, my odds of not being hurt are going to plummet way down.
I mean, it's like, yeah, the sport is unbelievable. There's so much that you have to consider. There's such a performance aspect of it that makes people, well, frankly, I think that there's like a lot of sexism when viewing it. They view it as a female sport. They view it as something that has pom-poms and is like fluffy and is cheering on the male sport, football, basketball. But like, cheerleaders are their own athletes. And yeah, there's like, you have to make sure that you're like doing your flips on beat, that you're like that you're like hand placement and that you're ready to catch the girl, and if she's coming at you like as a back spot, because that's a position in cheerleading who's at the foundation of the pyramid, you can't back away. You have to get up in there, broken nose, concussion, it doesn't matter what, like you are catching a hurling body.
Yeah,
it's wild.
It's time for a quick break, but I'll be right back with Devery Jacobs. And then at the end, I'll have one quick thing before I go about the latest in this year's bumper crop of great horror, and that is the neon feature Longlegs. So we're just gonna shout that movie out at the end and promote some fabulous horror, so stick around for that.
City pop to me is like a feeling.
City pop is beautiful music.
It's music that makes me emotional.
There's so many different sounds that fall into the city pop category.
It just feels very home to me.
We're just about wrapped on our inaugural season of Primer. If you didn't know, Primer is a new podcast that explores music from outside the English-speaking world. And Vulture called us one of the best podcasts of the year. Our first season covered Japanese city pop, and you just heard a few of our past guests share what the genre means to them. Learn more about the world of city pop and listen to some cool tunes. And if you like what we're doing, you can make a one-time contribution and help us reach our goal to produce a second season about a new genre. Support Primer over at MaximumFun.org/Primer.
Throughout history, sirens have captured men's attention, enticed men with their feminine wiles, and fulfilled men's primal needs. The sirens' allure persists.
They have not. Unless the primal need is, I need to be smashed on the rocks.
Yeah, smash me.
Smash me, mommy.
Smash me, mama.
Smash me, mommy.
The sirens' allure.
Why do we do this to ourselves?
Strand me, baby. Strand me,
baby. So yeah, listen to my brother, and me from Maximum Fun on Mondays. It's just like that. Just like that, but more, it's just like that, but more of it. There's just more of that.
One of the most recent recordings we did was with Mamadou Ache, and we got really into something that comes up a lot on this podcast, which is talking about kind of like the combinations and levels of endurance and delusion that are required for a career in entertainment. And you mentioned like there was a path for you where you were pursuing social work as a full-time career, and it kind of seems like there is overlap in the core soul of who a person is if their twin paths could be like social work in the face of severe adversity and then Hollywood. And it feels like for both of those, there is a combination of endurance and delusion that is required to be like, no, I'm going to keep pushing forward on these things in spite. So this feels very central to you, having this magical blend of those two qualities to be like, I'm going to do this in spite of all practical realities to the contrary.
I love this. I've never considered that.
I hope you don't take it as an insult. I hope you don't take it as an insult.
I think it's hilarious. I'm just like, thank you so much. I do have endurance and I am Delulu. Like that, you nailed it. It's awesome.
You know, I would imagine, like you said, this Cheer comes around and that series was so incredibly popular and then has a very strange long tail of a cultural life behind it. Woo. But like, so often in the industry, somebody needs an example of something successful for them to. You have the visionaries who are willing to bet, and then you have like the rest of the industry who wants to like race for second place. And so it's like, oh, this thing came out. Okay, we understand cheerleading now, so like we feel more inclined to push forward on Backspot. And then I feel like Reservation Dogs is one of those examples too, where it's like, well, we didn't somebody over at FX in their like incredible original like comedy department, because they're famous for like sort of pushing the medium forward in like that half hour format. saw that, and I feel like now that allows for the possibility of things that can come after Reservation Dogs because it was like this proof of concept. Do you find that in your career, are you finding that you are established based on your precedent, or do you feel like still like you are this proof of concept that's butting up against like, but what if? But how? Do we have an example of this? Like, do you feel you have the foundation enough to where it's like, and yeah, writer, director, producer, star as well, to where you're not confronting people as like this mysterious thing you have to explain anymore?
I feel like that's definitely still the case. Okay. I know, like, even when we were in the funding process of getting financing together for Backspot, we were not selected 1 year for this like grant system, and we had asked for feedback. They said, we love the script, we love the story, we just didn't understand why the protagonist was Indigenous. And, you know, like, there's just moments like that where you realize the like very specific and narrow view that people have of Native people now. And it's like, well, what do you mean that you're queer? What do you mean that you're also Native? What do you mean that you're also a cheerleader? Like, those things can and do exist. And I actually know quite a few people who fit those categories, who happen to be holding those identities. And yeah, I would have never been cast in a role like Riley in Backspot had I not created her for myself with DW. And I think that's still the case, where there are roles that I would love to be considered for that I don't think I'm necessarily on the radar for. And the sense that I'm getting right now is that it's like, oh my God, Reservation Dogs is so amazing. That's so like, what an incredible story. And we still don't know what to do with you. Like, we don't know what to do with you after that. And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm an actor.
Yeah. I do what's on the page. Like, that's my talent.
Literally.
That's my talent, in fact, is I meet the moment. That reminds me of something that I moderated a conversation that involved the directors Mariama Diallo and Nikiatu Jusu a number of years ago. And I asked at the time, like, you know, all this rhetoric around like change and equity in Hollywood, I was like, are you finding that, you know, is the pace of change even close to matching the scope of rhetoric that we hear about change when you're actually in the rooms with people trying to sell your movies? And a thing that Nikiatu said that has just stuck with me forever was that she found that there still needed to be an anchor of whiteness somewhere in her pitches so often, even if it was evil, even if it was antagonist. And she works in genre, so like when we're talking about bad guys, we're talking about like real malevolent forces here a lot of the time. She was like, but white people would rather see themselves as the villain than not see themselves at all. And that is what I find, is that it still kind of has to organize around some principle of whiteness in some way. It can't be in a vacuum without it. And that feels kind of like the question of like, but why does she need to be Indigenous springs from that exact same motivating worldview of like, but I need an explanation for why my anchor point is not white. Because despite you sitting here in front of me as a Native woman, can you explain to me why you're a Native woman? Can you explain to me why you are alive as you?
It's so wild. But like, I feel the same is also to be said for like straightness and like cisness. And in Backspot, like, I hadn't realized this, but a friend of mine who is very straight, love her to death.
She's trying hard out here.
She's holding it down. She's doing her best out there in that chaotic heterosexual world.
Hellscape.
And, but she saw Backspot and she was like, I've never seen queer community represented in this way. And I think so often, like, straightness is considered the norm. And like when watching films, there'll be like a group of straight people and then the one token queer friend.
Of course.
And like, that's actually not my experience at all as a person in the world. Like, we are in community with each other all the time. And we wanted that reflected in Backspot, where it's like, yes, Riley has her love interest, has her girlfriend who she's also best friends with.
Yeah.
But also she has like elder queers in her life where that's her coach and her assistant coach. And then she has peers like on her cheer team who also have girlfriends, because like queer people congregate to each other. We have a magnetic pull, whether that's queer friendships or romantic relationships or like wanting to look up to somebody. And so that was an element that was really important for us that I don't know has been explored in cinema before.
That is actually, like, I kind of hadn't thought about it I'd never really thought about it in those terms of, like, just how, like, obviously we're past the idea of just, like, the GBF as, like, the only construct we've got. But, like, it is actually, like, anathema to the existence of so many queer folks who are able to be exposed to a greater community. Like, the idea that in a major urban area, like, say you're, like, if you're watching a movie set in New York City and someone has a token gay, it's like, I don't think that token gay is subjecting themselves to a life of strictly being surrounded by straight people.
Yeah.
I don't think that's how they're choosing to spend their time.
It's almost like, oh, if they're not the gay best friend, do they even exist elsewhere? Like, it's wild that this is the assumption.
Robustly, I assure you, they do exist elsewhere. Now, another one I want to make sure that I touch on specifically. This is actually, I am now so excited whenever this comes up. The most brought to this conversation character in the course of this show is Lady Bird, which is, like, it's a great movie for, like, that coming-of-age girlhood, mothers and daughters kind of thing. But also there are so many of those movies that having Lady Bird rise to the top so often is fascinating to me. So tell me about your relationship with Lady Bird, because it's all individualized. It's all personal.
Yeah, I mean, I love to hear how basic I am. No,
it's like, no, it is a broad spectrum of person who comes on this show who's like, Lady Bird nailed it.
No, I believe you. I was joking because Greta did it best. Like, Greta created what I feel is a perfect movie. And, like, I think my specific in for high school, I went to an all-girls Catholic high school. Not Catholic at all, not Christian even in the slightest, but, like, happened to be there with, like, a busload of 50 girls from Guanajuato from my res. But, like, that silliness, that yearning, the, like, theater, like, all of the little isms and details, especially of that era, like, felt so reminiscent of my upbringing that I couldn't help but feeling seen by like, Greta's sensitivity and nuance of those, like, little moments is like actual perfection.
Yeah.
Why can't I just make the eggs?
Because you take too long, you make a big mess, and I have to clean the whole thing up.
Eggs aren't good for the environment anyways. What?
You heard her.
Eat quickly, please.
Look at all these pictures. Every newspaper looks like USA Today.
Shelly and I are trying to be vegan, hence the soy milk.
You wear leather jackets.
But they're vintage, so they don't support the industry.
They aren't done. There's white stuff.
You know how much you love Brambles? Pigs are smarter than him even.
I never thought Brambles was a genius, okay? Mom, the eggs are not done.
Fine, make your own fucking eggs.
I wanted to. You won't let me.
Sister doesn't like me.
I'm hungry.
She does.
There's your chance. Go to bed.
She just, like, the just, like, level of gets it that Greta Gerwig has. And just, like, I watched a Q&A with her one time where she had the most sort of, like, flitty and girly way of sort of, like, communicating every point in a way that I think in a situation where she was not as powerful as she is, it seems like she would be perhaps condescended to by men in the room for being just so, like, tall and pink and femme, and that, but she delivered the description of every single thing she was conveying with such conviction and clarity. I was just, like, watching this, like, spell cast over me, and I was watching this woman who was so utterly and completely herself, who had gotten, you know, so much of exactly what she wanted, like making Little Women, and I was just like, wow. Like, you feel like you walk into a room and you pitch your vision and you compromise yourself not at all as Greta Gerwig to do it, and I was so just stunned by her to watch that happen.
I love that. Yeah. And, like, embracing her femininity as, like, a strength and seeing that as, not having to hang with the boys in the same way that she could just be unapologetically girly and herself. And, like, so much fucking respect for her.
And just, you know, to direct on, you know, like, in costume, basically, to dress on theme while you direct is a real treat.
How fun!
If Danny
and I get married and then his grandma died, I'd inherit the dream house. Wouldn't his parents get it? Oh yeah, we'd have to kill them, and we'd have to kill his older brothers too.
a thing that struck me about like that threaded through sort of each of the four of these characters as well, and that like I find to be another like great joy of queerness is like there's like a central companion in each of these stories. Kiki has her cat, and Harriet has Gully, and then there is Cheryl Dunye and her best friend, and then there's obviously Ladybird and Beanie in Ladybird. And I wanted to hear from you about like that perhaps is a touch point, or perhaps maybe how that works in, you know, your sort of experience. Like, I think another one of the great joys of queerness is like an intimacy within friendship that gets to explore further and more interesting bounds, because it's like, hey, in that sense of chosen family, having to imagine closeness and connection and the mosaic of intimacy in different ways. And I wanted to hear from you about your experience and perhaps like writing, developing your own stories and where you prioritize relationships and how they build out, or perhaps your own life.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm always in search of queer community, specifically like indigiqueer and two-spirit community, because that's where I think I feel most seen and embraced and understood. And so like, yeah, I feel like I'm always in pursuit of that. I feel like I have found that sense of community. We're all actors, and so we're like everywhere across the continent at all times. So when we get to come together, it's far and few between. But like I have like queer siblings. I have, do you know what I mean? Like there's just there's such a sense of safety and community that I feel like I have the privilege of being a part of, and I think that's something that I am so fucking grateful for, and I hope for other people in that. When selecting Kiki's delivery service and feeling seen by Kiki specifically, I think the part that like ended up making me choose it and why I like keep coming back to it is almost the like mundanity of the film. Even though she's a witch and even though she has magic, it doesn't feel like that's the central point. It's not like Harry Potter or anything where that's kind of like the whole premise for the entire movie. And it's also happening during a time where Kiki's like losing her power and like she feels like she's losing her purpose, and then she learns that like her losing her magic is almost like a creative block, and it's drawing those parallels between like the artistic side of things and how you have to like nurture your spirit in order to be able to create, and if you just exploit it, like you're gonna run that well dry, the way that Kiki does with not being able to fly anymore. And then it's like to nurture that spirit and that sense of creativity and also rest and play, as opposed to only commodifying our art and our voice, was like, I think the thing that really helped, I don't know, it's something that I keep coming back to and need to like remind myself of in this, that like we are artists and that is where our magic comes from. And like that is the key behind it. And I think for me, that was like, don't get me wrong, love Gigi, also love like a freshly baked bread.
Of course, yes. Who among us?
But yes, that was ultimately like the key for me in connecting with Kiki's delivery service.
When you fly, you rely on what's inside of you, don't you?
Uh-huh. We fly with our spirit.
Trusting your spirit, yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That same spirit is what makes me paint and makes your friend bake. But we each need to find our own inspiration, Kiki. Sometimes it's not easy.
I guess I never gave much thought to why I wanted to do this. I got so caught up in all the training and stuff. Maybe I have to find my own inspiration. But am I ever gonna find it? And is it worth all the trouble?
Well, for example, there were quite a few times when I thought of painting something over that painting.
But it ended up being so great.
So I guess it's worth it.
Well, my final question to you would be then, as like you said, when you come out of New York the first time, you come back home, and you're like you're finding these like this difficulty in like these in parts, and so you start writing your own, you start working on your own projects. You obviously like incorporate direction and producing like into your career up to this point, and with the experiences that you have, and with the like you know arisen profile that you have, with what you have been able to do. What do you find you are, at this point, kind of most driven to fill in the holes of what you are not getting?
Yeah, I mean, I am working on my debut feature. I went to the Sundance Lab with it. I'm also writing a graphic novel. But I think, I think people have seen a lot of different things from me. But what I'm craving next is to, yes, continue working as an actor and helping other people bring their stories to life.
Mhm.
But as a creative, what I'm really craving is showing what my voice is.
Yeah.
Outside of Reservation Dogs, outside of like these couple of shorts that played at festivals years ago, I want, because so often for first features, it's a stamp on like, this is my calling card. This is who I am as a filmmaker. And so that's kind of what is really bubbling under the surface for me of like what my stamp is and what my debut feature is going to be. So that's something that I'm working on for the next little while.
All right. Well, then good luck on that. So much good luck on that, as I are all very much looking forward to seeing what that stamp is. And thank you so much for taking your time to talk to us today, Devery. I really appreciate it.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me and chatting and all of the great stuff. I want to check out this Jeff Barnaby episode. I haven't listened to it.
It was a written interview at Vulture, so you don't even have to listen to a whole podcast. It was an interview I did for Vulture. Yeah, you can text search and everything.
I will be doing that, but thank you for this.
Thank you so much to Devery Jacobs. Backspot is available to rent or buy on demand on most platforms. Let's go queer cheerleading dramas. And if you want to catch up with that or any of the films that made Devery feel seen, we will link to them in the show notes. And now, one quick thing before I go about The Cup Runneth Over, horror fans. I went and saw recently A Quiet Place Day 1, and the trailer roll, every single trailer before A Quiet Place Day 1, which was outstanding, by the way. I think maybe my favorite Quiet Place movie, promised just the rest of the year is full of bangers. I mean, we've got Smile 2 coming. We've got The Heretic from A24. We have got The Front Room from A24, which stars friggin' Brandy. We got Smile 2, which focuses on a pop star. We have got the Blumhouse remake of an international title, Speak No Evil. So much good stuff coming up. But among that, there's a couple neon titles to get excited about. One of them is Cuckoo, coming a little bit later in the summer. But for right now, we have Longlegs. It stars the genre queen Micah Monroe. It stars Nicolas Cage. I'm going to say, as you've never seen him before, because in this particular look, you really never have seen the man before. It stars Alicia Witt, an aughts horror, fabulous lady, and, of course, among other things. But we're tying in genre connections here. It stars Blair Underwood. It is about an FBI agent, a young FBI agent, just getting started in her career. And because she seems to have just a sort of heightened sense about things in this world, she gets put on a case, a long simmering, I think decades long simmering case of unsolved murders. Patriarchs killing their whole families and then turning their weapons on themselves. And there doesn't seem to be an intruder in the home. Seems to sort of be cut and dried that every one of these was, within the family killing. But there is the fingerprints, not literally, but notes left behind, calling cards, if you will, by the same person in every one of these slayings. And that person's name, well, he goes by Longlegs. That's how he signs his correspondence. And FBI agent Micah Monroe, aka Lee Harker, is put on the case to solve the mystery of Longlegs. I've seen it. It's really good. You guys, it's great. It is so haunting. It is so foreboding. It is written and directed by Osgood Perkins. I think it's the best thing he's done. I think it's the most accessible movies he has made as well. This is meant for crowds to watch together communally. He has really mastered tone poems, and he is a maker of modern myths. He even tackled the, age-old fairy tale, Gretel and Hansel in his film Hansel and Gretel. But this feels like a sort of malevolence for the ages. Longlegs feels like an iconic creepypasta, something that just sort of stalks around that you hear about from a friend of a friend of a cousin of a sister of a friend, and the legend sort of persists throughout time. A Bloody Mary, a Candyman kind of thing. And the movie's just excellent. It's got some fantastic jump scares in it that will really, I think, jolt you in your seat, but it is just dread all over the place. Couldn't recommend it more. And we love to recommend horror on this podcast. So that's our show. We're ending on a victorious note of go new horror. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at FeelingSeenPod or send us an email at feelingseen@MaximumFun.org. If you want to follow me, I am Jorcru on Twitter. That's JORCRU. Our music is by Andrew Epen. The show is produced by Marissa Blacksbart. Our senior producers are Kevin Ferguson and Laura Swisher, and this is a production of Maximum Fun.
Maximum Fun,
a worker-owned network
of artist-owned shows.
supported directly by you.